The Supreme Court just landed a knockout blow on Donald Trump's trade agenda, declaring a central piece of his global tariff plan illegal. This was a decision that looked like it could change the price of, well, everything. So, what did this explosive 6-3 ruling actually say, and what on earth happened in the chaotic hours that followed? Because the story isn't just that the court told the president no. The real story is what he did next. On February 20th, 2026, the Supreme Court handed down one of its biggest rulings on presidential power in decades. It gutted the legal authority President Trump had used for his sweeping Liberation Day tariffs, a move that had pulled in an estimated $175 billion and totally rewired global supply chains. For a brief shining moment, it looked like the entire America First economic project was about to fall apart. Businesses that had paid billions saw a light at the end of the tunnel, a chance for colossal refunds. But that light was an oncoming freight train. Within hours, the president didn't just push back, he escalated, unleashing a whole new wave of tariffs under a different law. He plunged American businesses and consumers right back into a world of crushing economic uncertainty. This isn't just a story about a court case. It's a story about power, fury, and a president who, when told no, found a much louder way to say yes. So what was this case, Learning Resources Inc. v. Trump, actually about? At its core was a 1977 law called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA. This law lets a president regulate economic transactions during a national emergency. It was designed after the Nixon era to put a leash on executive power. Think freezing foreign bank accounts or blocking financial deals in a crisis. In its nearly 50-year history, no president had ever used it to slap broad global tariffs on everyone. But the Trump administration argued the law's wording, which allows the president to regulate importation, was a green light. Citing national emergencies over trade deficits and fentanyl, they rolled out massive duties, including a baseline 10% reciprocal tariff on pretty much all U.S. trade partners. These tariffs weren't just a policy, they were the policy, a club used to pressure allies and rivals alike. The Supreme Court, in a stunning 6-3 decision, said that was a bridge too far. Chief Justice John Roberts, writing for the majority, delivered a sharp, powerful rebuke. His opinion was basically a lecture on the separation of powers. He argued that a tariff is a tax, and the Constitution is crystal clear that Congress, and only Congress, holds the power to tax. If Congress was going to hand over a power that huge, it would need to do it with blinking neon signs, not vague language. In one particularly sharp passage, Roberts wrote, based on 2 words separated by 16 others in IEPA, regulate and importation, the president asserts the independent power to impose tariffs on imports from any country, of any product, at any rate, for any amount of time. He finished the thought with, those words cannot bear such weight. The majority hammered home that this was a completely unprecedented use of the law. This lack of historical precedent, plus the sheer scale of the power the White House was claiming, told the court the executive branch had jumped the fence. But the real drama wasn't just what was decided, but who decided it. The majority wasn't just a predictable bloc. Chief Justice Roberts was joined by Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, Jackson, and, in a move that sent shockwaves through Washington, 2 of Trump's own first-term appointees, Neil Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett. Their joining the majority was a political earthquake. It sent a clear message. This wasn't about politics, but about the fundamental limits of presidential power. Roberts, Gorsuch, and Barrett leaned on a concept called the Major Questions Doctrine, which says that on huge economic issues, the president needs obvious, explicit permission from Congress. The other justices in the majority got to the same place just by reading the law itself and finding no mention of tariffs. The dissent came from Justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Brett Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh's dissent, especially, seemed to foreshadow the chaos to come. While he argued for giving the president more leeway in foreign policy, he also basically laid out a roadmap of other laws the president could use to impose tariffs. He warned the court's decision would create massive uncertainty, especially with that $175 billion already collected. And in a crucial move, the court punted on whether that money should be refunded, leaving importers twisting in the wind. The reaction from the White House wasn't just fast, it was volcanic. President Trump, who had been hyping the case for months as one of the most important in history, was incandescent with rage. At a press conference thrown together at the last minute, he did not hold back. He called the ruling deeply disappointing, ridiculous, and dumb. He said he was ashamed of the justices who voted against him, accusing them of not having the courage to do what's right for our country. His language went from disappointed to deeply personal. He called the majority justices fools and lapdogs for the rhinos, very unpatriotic, and disloyal to our Constitution. He even threw out the baseless claim that the court had been swayed by foreign interests. Then he aimed his fire directly at his own picks. He singled out Justices Neil Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett, claiming their decision was an embarrassment to their families. The contrast was jarring. In the next breath, he praised the dissenters, Thomas, Alito, and especially Kavanaugh, for their strength and wisdom and love of our country. He held up Kavanaugh's dissent as a work of genius and his great ability, adding he was so proud of him. It was a stunning public beatdown of the judiciary by a sitting president, aimed squarely at justices he put on the court. He couldn't believe they hadn't dealt with the money. "What happens to all the money that we took in?" he asked. It wasn't discussed. Wouldn't you think they would have put one sentence in there saying that keep the money or don't keep the money? What this tirade really showed was a president who sees the court not as a separate branch of government, but as a team that's supposed to deliver for him. The ruling wasn't a legal loss, it was a personal betrayal. When a reporter asked if he regretted appointing Gorsuch and Barrett, he sidestepped, just repeating that the decision was terrible. This was more than a political spat. It was a declaration of war on a co-equal branch of government. But even as the insults were flying, a new plan was already clicking into place. The rage was just the opening act. Okay, this story is moving fast, and it gets even crazier. We're about to get into the nuts and bolts of how President Trump immediately flipped this legal defeat into a raw display of power. If you appreciate this kind of deep dive analysis that gets you past the headlines, now's the perfect time to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. It really helps us keep breaking down these critical events. Section 3. The Pivot. Trump Strikes Back. While the media was obsessing over the insults, the real game was being played behind the scenes. Within hours of the Supreme Court's decision, the White House announced a whole new tariff regime. The IEEPA tariffs were dead. Long live the Section 122 tariffs. President Trump issued a new proclamation, this time using a different, much more obscure law, Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. This dusty old statute, designed to fix a balance of payments crisis, had never been used by a president to impose tariffs this broad. It lets the president put a temporary import surcharge of up to 15% on goods for 150 days, max. Effective February 24, 2026, just 4 days after the ruling, a new 10% global tariff was slapped on nearly all imports, right on top of any other duties. For the business community, the whiplash was unbelievable. For a few hours, they thought the tariff nightmare was ending. Now, they were stuck with a new, legally separate tariff that looked and felt almost identical to the one that was just killed. But he wasn't done. The very next morning, he announced he planned to hike that new 10% tariff to the full 15% allowed. And in a third punch, he ordered the U.S. Trade Representative to fire up a bunch of new investigations under Section 301, the same tool used for many of the targeted China tariffs in his first term. This cracked open the door for even more tariffs on specific countries. The message couldn't have been clearer. The Supreme Court took one club away, so the president grabbed 3 more. He spun it not as a loss, but as a win. He claimed this new legal path gave him far more powers and legal certainty. He boasted this would bring in more money and threatened much higher tariffs on any country that tried to play games. The economic chaos in the headline wasn't a stock market crash. It was the chaos of not knowing what comes next. A volatile and legally shaky tariff system had been replaced by a different, equally volatile, and legally untested one. The Supreme Court offered one moment of clarity, only for the White House to plunge the entire global trading system right back into the fog. The fallout from this dizzying chain of events is messy and deeply unsettling for anyone running a business in America. First, the money. The court killed the IEEPA tariffs, but it pointedly did not order the government to refund the estimated $175 billion it had already collected. This is a legal and logistical nightmare. Importers who paid these illegal taxes aren't getting automatic checks. They'll have to sue, one by one, to claw their money back in what will be years of brutal court fights. For the small and medium-sized businesses who ate these costs, it's devastating. Second, the pivot to Section 122 created a new kind of economic whiplash. Imagine you run a business that imports parts. On February 20th, you hear the tariffs are dead. Your costs are about to drop. You might even get a refund. By the 24th, a new 10% tariff is back on, and the next day, there's talk of it hitting 15%. How can you possibly plan? You can't. Investment stops. Hiring freezes. This uncertainty is a tax all by itself, dragging down the economy. This whole episode also ripped open a growing crack in the Republican Party. The reactions were night and day. On one side, you have die-hard Trump allies like Congressman Buddy Carter, who called the ruling judicial overreach that sold out American workers. On the other, you have Republicans like Congressman Don Bacon, who called broad tariffs bad economics and praised the court for putting a check on the executive branch. You're seeing the Republican Party literally fighting with itself over its identity. Is it the party of economic nationalism or the party of free trade and constitutional limits? The chaos is right there. It's in the millions of delayed business decisions, the supply chains being redrawn for the 10th time, and the fact that the entire U.S. economy is now hostage to a temporary 150-day tariff that is already being challenged in court by 24 states. This showdown has set the stage for a new series of battles that will define the political landscape for years. First, the legal fight is far from over. That lawsuit from 24 states is already in court, arguing the president's use of Section 122 is illegal because there's no balance of payments crisis. The case is on a fast track, but no matter who wins, it's going straight back to the Supreme Court. We are now in a race against the clock, because these new tariffs expire on July 24, 2026, unless Congress extends them, which seems almost impossible. Second, the political battle. President Trump has now brilliantly reframed this for his base. It's no longer a story about a legal defeat. It's a story of him against a disloyal court and the rhinos. He can run into the midterms claiming he's the only one tough enough to fight for American workers, and that even when the system tries to stop him, he finds a way. That narrative is potent. And third, the big one, the long-term question of presidential power. The Supreme Court drew a firm line on using IEEPA for tariffs. That's a major win for the separation of powers. But the administration's immediate jump to other laws shows that the impulse to use tariffs as a primary weapon hasn't gone anywhere. The fight over who controls trade hasn't been settled. It has just moved to a new arena. For American businesses and consumers, the only guarantee is more uncertainty. The current tariffs might expire in July, but the White House has already signaled it will have new Section 301 tariffs ready to go. The cycle of chaos looks set to continue. So where does all this leave us? The Supreme Court tried to put the brakes on President Trump's use of emergency powers for trade, but that victory lasted for about half a day. In a furious, defiant counterpunch, the president unleashed new tariffs, attacked the court, and turned a legal loss into a political rally. The economic chaos that followed wasn't a crash, but a crippling uncertainty that has left American businesses unable to plan for the future. The fundamental conflict is still raging. A president who is determined to use tariffs as his weapon of choice, and a constitutional system that is struggling to figure out where the boundaries are. What do you think about all this? Was the court right to step in, or was it getting in the way of a necessary economic policy? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if you want to keep up with these complex stories, make sure you're subscribed to the channel with notifications turned on. Thanks for watching.